Okay, so the first thing is a session at Collab Summit in Vancouver. It looks like we just need someone to coordinate what's going on there for diagnostic stuff. I don't know if there's any volunteers to drive on that.
I'm unfortunately not attending. It's like unfortunate timing with another event.
Yeah, I don't know that I am going to be able to attend. I think that's still up in the air.
I'll be at the Collaborator Summit, but probably like completely dead from flying back from Dublin in the middle of the night.
So,
me and Kelvin would be there as well.
Yeah, we will be there.
Do you guys want to coordinate on this? I'm not even sure what it means.
As I guess it means that we would reach out to, and yeah, like email and say that it's happening.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, like somebody, I guess I would expect somebody's got some stuff to present and or some things to talk about and or some stuff like that. Like, is there an agenda, what is that agenda? Who's speaking to it?
Yeah, I would imagine like if you have more collaborators available in person, like what are the topics we want to talk about with the broader collaborator base, and what topics you want to drive and sort of call for help from a broader collaborator base on. Or we could run it like just another meeting like we have here with the same set of suspects that show up at this meeting. I prefer the former.
Sorry, tell me again what the former was.
So the former was the idea that given that I expect there's a broader collaborator base attending at the Collab Summit, I think it might be a good idea to give an overview of what are the main things the diagnostic working group is working on and what are the areas where we need help from the broader collaborator base. And so basically trying to get more help from the rest of the collaborators on some of the bigger issues that we have that need somebody to drive those things.
That sounds good to me. Michael, for context, we're just talking about the first thing, which is this, the session in Vancouver.
Yeah, we can't hear you.
Sorry, you can't hear who?
It looks like Michael's talking.
Michael Dawson, are you talking? Well, yeah, we can't hear you.
Needs to drive the discussion. Somebody needs to be, I guess, if there's any presentation or any slides, then somebody needs to prepare them and somebody needs to go over the agenda.
Like something to present to everyone at the summit, at the Collab Summit, as like a state of diagnostics thing for everyone else.
Yeah, I mean, I think at a minimum, maybe we could just sort of, capture kind of the issues that we've been talking about here. And then I think per Ali's comment, it's like, is there anything else that anybody's interested in? And then opening it up to whoever's there that wants to sort of talk about it, and then just kind of pulse through these things, see if we can generate some excitement, perhaps somebody to dive in and help out with stuff.
I think that, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Now I can.
Okay. I think that sounds good as a start. We probably still want to schedule some time for diving into, like, is it a good place to go through the async terminology stuffs in more depth or something like that? as well.
Yeah, it probably is.
How much time do we have?
I seem to remember some of the slots were like an hour and a half. So like it might be a matter of saying, you know, we could prioritize the overview and sort of call for additional help. If that discussion goes long, you know, just keep doing that. But if we finish that, then, you know, having a few working type things we want to work on would probably also be good. If, you know, if there's things like, I think like the async terminology, it probably would benefit from some FaceTime, right?
No, it absolutely would. I have a deck. I need to get it a little bit updated. I should know soon, like if I'm going to be attending. I think there's some open questions on the schedule for me, and so I don't know if Mark is going to be attending. Is Mark on the call?
I think he's on the call. It'd be nice, yeah, to know whether you or Mark will be there.
I'll find out. I mean, if it's a case, let me find out. I think certainly for the async terminology stuff, I can go through that. I think it'd be great if someone wanted to kind of drive the other bits of, you know, the discussion. If somebody wants to volunteer, I love for that to happen.
So you mean the intro part, or
what's that?
The intro part, or
yeah, like the intro overview. Like if somebody wants to knock those slides together, and like I think that would be great. I mean, I suppose I could do it as well, but I'm trying to sort of limit myself from being overcommitted, and I'm in fear right now of being overcommitted. So
I can take a first cut at pasting them in, like the list into this, and then I think if we worked on that to make sure we're not missing any, putting it into a few slides isn't that hard. I could do that.
Okay, that'd be great.
Unless anybody else wants to volunteer.
I mean, yeah, I was gonna say that I haven't been attending these meetings for a while just because I had conflicts, but I like, you know, I can talk to Lee separately about like getting up to speed on the topics I'm talking about here, and then I can put together a slide deck of some sort.
That sounds good.
So this is when is this? This is October 12th. What is the dates?
I think so. Yeah, that's a Friday.
So okay, and so the summit is when? Does anybody know offhand?
Like what time?
Yeah. Well, what are the dates of the summit? Is it?
I think it's Friday, Saturday.
Oh, is it?
Oh, it's Friday and Saturday.
Yeah, I'd have to look. I can find here. I can find the schedule.
That's the collaborator summit, and the conference is Wednesday, Thursday. Is that right?
Right. Yep.
Okay, so so then we will have one more of these calls before the summit. Is that right? Or two? Not looking at the calendar.
That seems right.
One more?
Yeah, one more.
Okay, so then next call, we should be able to say like, hey, we've got a clear picture of the owners and what's expected here, et cetera, et cetera. Is that right?
I guess we'll have a much better idea of who's going to be there. And right. Because like right now we have, I guess you're not sure whether you're there, right? Like, and then I guess just because there's other people that are not here right now, we'll probably be here there at the summit, right?
Yeah, I'm just like, sort of, I think to make sure no balls are dropped, I would expect that the next call here, it's like somebody is like, oh yeah, I'm confident that whatever needs to be done for this is being done, right?
Mm.
Is that a fair assumption?
That whatever needs to be done will be done.
Well, that 2 weeks from today, that there's at least one person who's confident that they have the ball here and it is not being dropped. Is that
Right.
Is that fair?
I think we want to, 2 weeks from today, we'd want to know what we're doing. I don't think it needs to be overly formal if we don't want to make it, right?
Yeah.
Like it's a slot for the group to get together. It can be a working session. It can be a presentation. I think if we have somebody, if we know who's going to be there, that's kind of important. And then if we have the list of initiatives, it's a matter of like, do we have somebody who's willing to stand up and talk about that initiative? And we, if we want to put together slides, that's great. But I also think if people are busy and we don't want to do that, just having somebody actually get up and try and communicate what it is and motivate people to get involved would work too.
Okay.
And then, following that, having a couple working sessions where, whoever those, I think we do need somebody who's going to be like leading that working session.
Okay.
Right. Like if it's async terminology, we want somebody who's kind of lead the discussion.
Sure.
So that we're driving in some direction on that.
Okay.
So does that make sense to everybody, or?
Yeah. So I'm somewhat familiar with the async terminology stuff, so I'll definitely be there at that discussion. I guess pending whether other people that are familiar with it will be there, I can also help lead that.
Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, I'd love to kind of hear, someone else start to kind of repeat some of the things that, we've been trying to communicate regarding async contact. So I think if you want to do it, or if you want to help out with that, I think that's great. I do have a deck. I need to do a few tweaks on it. It tries to paint some pictures of things that I think would be, effective. But let's see how things shake for me, and then we'll discuss more in 2 weeks on it.
Okay, that sounds good.
Great. Okay. So next thing here, there's this best practices guide. There's, again, at the risk of being overcommitted here. I don't know if anybody has any updates. I started trying to do some stuff around memory leak analysis, and I hope to make some progress there over the next week or so. And of basically a form being like, hey, here's kind of an example, and then driving through the example and how you use Chrome DevTools to actually arrive at this is my leak. I do think this is an area that's sort of ripe for improved tooling, but I don't exactly know what that improved tooling needs to do, but that's the only update there I have.
I think some of these areas. Sorry.
I was just going to say, have you heard from Jarish on that front at all, or?
I have not.
No? Okay.
But there could be some comments in here that I've missed. Yeah, I mean, there hasn't been any activity in a while.
All right, I was just curious. Like, anyway, when I'm talking to him next, I'll ask what his plans are on that front too.
Yeah, I mean, he'd mentioned something when I was in San Francisco about it, and he seemed interested. I haven't had really time to kind of pursue it in the last, 6 weeks, 8 weeks probably. So, okay, so the deep dives, number 160, I still owe one on the async context stuff. And I haven't had time to schedule that. I guess that's one's still open if anybody ever wants to go in and schedule anything. I'm not aware of anything. So expectation about tier support from diagnostic tools and VMs, number 157. I don't remember what the status was last time here. I know that an initial PR went in that sort of...
It's in, so I think that's done. I think now it's a matter of we actually want to move things up in the matrix. I did see that there was an issue, which I can't find off the top of my head right now, about raising one of the particular ones, right?
Yeah, that was Node Clinic. It's a top issue in the diagnostics channel repo issue
okay.
tracker.
That's where it was.
So what was this one?
That was about raising Node Clinic to level 3.
Right. So I guess it's the... So what was 3 is in the tests? Or not? I think 4 is...
Yeah, the issue that was raised in that issue was that it would be nice to have Node Clinic as part of the test suite or to run the tests. That was a problem that I think it was Ruben who made the issue. He wanted to raise. He wanted to fix.
Right.
So to basically run the test suite so that, because I guess Node Clinic probably uses a lot of really deep level stuff that might break or is prone to. I guess it seems like if I understood it correctly, that was the main issue.
Is this the first thing that would be getting bumped up a level?
I think it's the only one. The only one, yeah. We don't have anything in the higher tiers yet. There's at least one that we probably can already move up, like the CPU profiler. Some flavor of that, which that had been worked on, right, and fixed. I think there's testing in core for that, so we can probably move that up. But yeah, currently we don't have anything that's actually higher up in the listing.
And then there's a PR open for Node Report.
Right, that's to get that in. Yep.
Once that's in core, would that move up?
Once we have everything in testing, yeah, once the testing's in place, we could potentially move that up to, what was the one that we targeted for? Yeah, tier 1.
So that PR completes, it lands, the PR has tests in it?
Yeah, I think that would probably get it to there.
Okay.
I guess the question, like for me in this specific one, is I agree that like adding coverage of flame graphs, and is the only question would be, is like adding Node Clinic the best one? Are there others that we think we should, is there some other test we should add instead to cover the flame graph part of things?
Right, and Node Clinic actually uses a lot of APIs. For example, it uses TraceEmit as well, and I think it might be a bit too bulky
Right.
thing to move as a first thing.
Yeah.
I agree that we probably need some sort of simpler units that we probably need to test better. But having said that, I don't know what's involved in Node Clinic testing.
Yeah, if there's an existing test suite which would cover a bunch of things and it's low work, maybe it makes sense versus having to come up with something else. I mean, tier 3 is basically, we try and run it. You know, it says if possible, tests would be run at least nightly in Node CI. So I think normally I wouldn't say that like it's got to the point where we'd normally add it, but if it's adding coverage for stuff that we do want to cover and we don't have any other way to cover it right now, I could see it in that context.
So I'm typing a response here in this issue,
Okay.
and just tell me if this sounds accurate for this discussion. I'm saying, discussed in the diagnostics working group call, some concern here that clinic is too broad and touches too many things, whereas smaller, more targeted tools would better, what's the right word? Would be better scoped. Is that
Right.
clear?
Do we have a flame, like does anybody know of a flame graph tool that we suggest instead?
There is a bunch of others, but I'm not sure who qualifies. But there are definitely some that are more scoped than that. Side note, like, how do we differentiate between when we want to add this to level 3 just because, oh, it's nice to have the test coverage, and how do and other cases, right? Because we have other means of ensuring test coverage. We have SITGIM, which is like exactly is for this purpose. So could this be added to SITGIM instead? Would that make sense? Why? I think this list is mainly for things that, I guess, of course, no clinic is diagnostic related, obviously.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it makes sense. But I'm just saying there's a bunch of overlap with SIPGIM here that I'm not quite sure how to position.
Yeah, well, I think in terms of that overlap, I'm not concerned because this could justify why it's part of SITGIM, right? Like, if we decide we want testing to cover these things, I don't think it matters. Like, this is not specific at all in terms of how the test coverage is added, and SITGIM could be part of that coverage.
Well, yeah. So by being on level 3, it would basically just mean that we add it to SITGIM.
It could be.
Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I mean, basically, all that says is, as you know, this is meant to call out things we think are important to keep working. And, you know, it would be part of the rationale to say, well, if SITGIM's the best way to test it, then adding it to SITGIM makes sense. Or if adding some core tests or adding a separate job makes sense. The bigger concern is, like, in some cases, and we're still, I guess, struggling a little bit, is like in some cases we're trying to make sure an API still works. So I don't think anybody would argue that having some testing that makes sure that the API that generates the data for the flame graphs, that would be great. In this case, though, you know, it wouldn't so much be that we care if Node Clinic itself is working, but that the flame graph part of Node Clinic is working, because that's our flame graph coverage, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
So it's how we distinguish that.
Yeah, basically, it's, correct me if I'm wrong, if you put it on level 3, does that mean, and the test then fails, that would technically mean that we could not release a new version of Node?
No.
Until it was fixed?
No, 3 is just we try and run it nightly if we can.
Okay, so it's not a showstopper?
No.
Okay.
Okay, so there's some concern here. The clinic is too broad and touches too many things, where smaller, more targeted tests would be better scoped here. Is there some existing flame graph tool that could be added to the matrix that would be more targeted and prevent clinics' flame graphs from breaking? Is it appropriate to test this via SITGIM? And can we add tests at an API level to ensure that flame graph APIs are working correctly? That is, the tests aren't validating clinic itself, but rather are testing APIs clinic depends on. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, and I guess maybe just an additional comment would be that, like, those smaller, like the API tests would have a better chance of moving up to even higher levels, right? Like, if we had an API test that tests the flame graph, the API for that the flame graphs need, or the data generation, that I could see pushing up trying to push up to say, well, that should actually block releases at some point. Whereas if Node Clinic in general doesn't work, I don't think we can block a node release based on that, right?
Okay. Okay.
Do we know,
I captured that. Sorry, go ahead.
Do we know which API they're using for this flame graph generation? There is a new in V8 that is experimental at the moment. Is that the one? I mean, it's not a flame graph API per se. It's a profiling API, right? But you can use that, of course, to generate the flame graphs. But I wasn't actually familiar with a specific flame graph API. Do we have that?
Well, no, I think it's, yeah, no, I think it's just, yes, it's that piece that generates data that you can then generate flame graphs from.
Yeah, because if it's that API, that is, if I remember correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, that is currently marked as experimental. So in no way would that be a blocker, right?
No. So that's experimental in V8 though, right? Or V8 or in Node?
So there is the, let me just look it up. But there is Node, a really newer version of Node exposes V8 objects, where, if I remember correctly, you can get some of this, or maybe it's not that, but I would imagine it's something like that it's using, but I can't remember exactly. I would have to look it up. Maybe it's not that one. Maybe it's
So
the VM one.
V8 CPU profiler is definitely not experimental. It's been in production for years.
Right.
If you're talking about the API in Node.js that exposes that, I don't have any details on that.
I think getting the details of exactly what's being used is a good next step, and then we could better understand is like there's something there, because I thought the stuff that Matthias had already worked on, there was, you know, unit tests built into Node itself for.
Yeah, so the complexity here is that there's 3 distinct ways you can build flame graphs on Node. Like, one is to write a native module that uses the C++ CPU profile API. The other one is to use the inspector protocol to get a CPU profile from there. The third one is trace events. Trace events, you can also get the CPU profiler to emit samples on the trace events channel.
Right, but that's just the CPU profiler that V8 has internally, right? What Matthias actually fixed is Linux perf, which is a totally different thing.
Right, yeah, perf is entirely different from the CPU profiler. But what I was getting at is that I think when we move something to a particular tier, I think we have to be clear which API we're trying to harden. Right? So there's 3 distinct ways of doing it, and trace events is experimental. Inspector has a different use case than a native module, right? So and I don't think just adding Node Clinic is targeted enough, because they could change implementation underneath the covers, and now we're maybe testing a different API than we originally were testing. So I think that's where I was coming from the point of view of, when you do testing, I think it's better to start with a simpler test rather than a big application as a test, as the first one that you add, because it just has more complexity, it has more moving parts, and if something breaks, it's harder to figure out why it broke.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess, you know, the counter argument to that is that, you know, Clinic is important. People want Clinic to keep working. How do you ensure that it keeps working? And
Clinic keeping working doesn't necessarily mean that the flame graph tool from Brendan Gregg is continuing to work, right? So, and I think what we want to make sure is that as broad of the ecosystem is functional, as opposed to a specific tool.
Yep.
Sure, but I thought part of this was to say, well, what are the set of tools that we need to say, you know, are continuing to work and not getting broken on each release? And then the question is, well, how does Clinic fit in there as a tool, right? So in that sense, it seems valid. I mean, I totally buy your point that there should be API tests that are validating the APIs that Clinic has a dependency on. And I total agreement that that's easier than sort of this broader test of like, does Clinic work? But I don't know that those are necessarily, like, those are mutually exclusive things, right? But that's fine. I've got a comment on here on this specific issue that I'm going to post. And I think if you guys disagree or I didn't capture the discussion correctly, then chime in and tell me what was wrong about it. And it'll be interesting, I think, to see what people have to say.
Yeah, I think there'll be some interesting info. I'm a little bit, I agree with everything Ali said, but the only thing I temper it with is if we have no volunteers to do the targeted stuff and a potential volunteer to add something that gives us some coverage, it's not necessarily a bad thing. So,
yeah, I agree with that sentiment.
But we'd have to figure out, like, I'd still want to understand what coverage we're getting by adding it. And specifically, like you said, like it's covering this API. So, okay, it makes sense in that context as opposed to in the context of the tool itself.
Okay. Comments are up there. So feel free to chime in. Agenda. Okay, async hooks number 124. Any updates here from anybody?
Is that the one where Material to try to land this PR?
Well, this is the broader. This is the async hooks stable API tracking issue.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Part of that we sort of discussed in the past was that Matteo was trying to land his PR, but there was pushback for some reasons. I don't remember which. I think it had something to do with some specific objects being recycled in certain ways and sort of.
Yeah, I think the main part of the PR is to use resources side by side with async IDs, and some async operations recycle the resources so that they can be shared, which would mean that they would have different async IDs, but the same resource, which doesn't make it work well. I'm wondering whether this should, the scope of this should be widened so that we should explore whether not recycling the resource is something feasible.
I thought that was a comment somebody had, which is that that's generally a bad thing that we should move away from.
Yeah, so I mean, if it's a hacky optimization that's been put in there, which is blocking this essentially performance fix that we have, so then maybe.
Sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, then maybe we should get rid of this hacky performance thing.
It's pretty much entirely just due to HTTP parser reuses the handle, and no one actually likes HTTP parser, and there's been lots of discussions of replacing it with like a JavaScript implementation or something. So I think eventually we just need to do something about it. Like at the very least, we could just wrap the HTTP parser in something so like each use of it gets its own handle or something somehow. Even though like under the covers it's really nothing.
Yeah, a layer of indirection.
Sorry, go ahead, Ali.
Yeah, no, I was just agreeing. I was saying adding a layer of indirection so that like we still continue to reuse the resource, but it looks like a different handle.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I was going to ask if the, and I can't remember Matteo's PR, but like if the equality check just becomes comparing sort of the tuple of the async ID and the resource, does it just fix this easily in his PR? Because that effectively gives you the same thing, which is uniqueness, right? maybe. No.
So from our perspective, this is actually one of the things that could still improve performance by a lot. We have been, and especially Benedict has been trying to squeeze blood from stone, essentially. We have also been approaching TCC39 to change the spec in a way that allows us to one more cycle. We will use async await. And we've been looking at omitting temporary promises from triggering promise hooks. But I think the biggest gain that you can get is from this PR that Matteo has. Because yes, async IDs and this resource are sort of equivalent in that they both represent uniqueness, but having an object means that you could store metadata either directly onto those resource objects, or you could use a weak map to store metadata. This is something that you can't do with an ID unless you risk memory leak or has to use a destroy hook, which is terribly slow.
Right. So that
I think
yeah, go ahead, Thomas.
I was just going to say that I think it would be super valuable to have both Matteo's input on this, but also Andreas, which he was the one that raised the original concern about Matteo's PR not or having some issues. So having them both on this call would at some point in the future would be really nice to get a proper discussion about this.
Yeah, and actually, I actually was going to talk about the same topic too. So I was talking to Matteo because it turns out Matteo has not been making this meeting because this time slot just doesn't work. So if we are going to have a discussion on this meeting time slot doesn't work. So what I am going to propose is that I already talked to Young and Matteo about this. Is that I send out a doodle for a one-off meeting specifically on this topic, and I propose we do it next week because we don't have a diagnostic working group meeting next week. So I'll send out a doodle and I can open an issue, and hopefully that we can get the right participants involved in the discussion so that we can actually kickstart it again. So my concern is that, yeah, go ahead.
Do we know whether Andreas is going to attend JS Interactive?
I do not know.
Because that would be the alternative to that, to have a real face-to-face.
It's one of our working sessions.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we can actually. So I guess there's two ways to do it. One is so I can open an issue that asks whether the right people are going to be at Node.js Interactive. If not, I think we should go ahead with a online meeting like this, and I can send out a doodle for that if that's the case.
Yeah, I would agree with that because I think it's like if you can get it resolved through an online meeting, great, and if not, then it's like you'll have a more clear picture of what you need to talk about in person at Summit if everybody was there, right?
Yeah, I would agree. Don't necessarily delay for the Summit. If it's not resolved by then maybe use the time, but otherwise the online one may get it resolved faster.
Sounds good to me.
And
I'll open an issue.
collaborative summit could also be a good time for a second discussion. If they have one discussion, then there's more stuff needs to be brought up later.
Yep. The other thing I'd add is I know Jarish has a bit of a hard time with this time slot. So maybe, and if it doesn't work for Matteo, maybe it's we should look to see if we can adjust that.
Mateo's last comment was that, with the approach of whatever daylight savings time or whatever it's called, is going to fix that for him, was what I thought. But if there's other people that want to attend that would like to attend, it's like, I kind of feel like we do this every 3 or 4 months and we end up with a time that is in this thing of like it works for some people and not for everybody. And I don't know that there's ever a way around that. But if people have concrete suggestions, I'm happy to.
I think it's still worth revalidating every so often if it's the right time. The only other suggestion is like an alternating time slot, so that, you know, one time it's 1 hour, the next time it's a different hour, and that way it maximizes. You know, you don't get everybody every time, but more people have a chance.
That's another good thing for the agenda, right? At Vancouver.
Yep.
But I also think that we don't have, like, for things like this where it's just like a one-off discussion we need to have, where we need to have certain people in the room, so to speak, that it's fine to like have a separate meeting that doesn't fall at the normal time slot.
Absolutely. I was just adding that as a totally separate issue that maybe we want to.
I think eventually we will want to have 2 time slots, though, just because we really aren't very good at covering like Europe and Asia times right now.
Okay, I'm going to open an issue where we can chime in there. Review the time slot for the current meeting. For the
Okay. Okay, so moving on to async contact stuff. I have a DAC. I need to update it. I feel like I've been saying that for the last 2 months. I haven't made any progress on that. And then the trace event tracking issue number 84. I don't remember what the status was here.
I can give status. So I have been investigating some of the thread races that Trace has, and I think I have some of the fixes out now. And the idea is to get, to fix some of these issues that have been plaguing Trace event and making it like crash intermittently on shutdown, so that we can have something that's reliable enough to be used by like Node Clinic and other things. There is another project that Chrome is looking at that the VA team will also be exploring, I understand, called Perfetto, that I talked about, I think, last time around. And the idea would be Perfetto is a library that basically extracts tracing code into a standalone thing that both Android and Chrome are switching to. So that will get rid of some of the complexity of how we've hooked up V8 and Node at the moment with TraceEvent. And my hope is that this change can be made without any API changes. So yeah, so that's the status at the moment. And I would really, there's some cool things that can be done with trace events, and Node Clinic is one example, and there's another one that I was working on the other day with a colleague of mine, which was just trying to understand file operations, IO operations. I think there's a good set of tools that can be built on top of it, so it'd be nice that if we, at some point, we get some demos of what all is possible with trace events at some venues.
So you said you're fixing the current implementation with some stuff, but if you swap in Perfetto, it obviates the current implementation, and it should, in theory, address all of these various issues, right?
Yeah, it's a standalone library as opposed to, so right now the way we have hooked up V8 and Node is that V8 exposes some superclasses with some vague interface, an API contract, and Node implements and overrides some of the subclasses. But the choreography of when things are supposed to happen and what are the constraints on certain operations happening was not clear, and this is what our code suffered. And that was causing all of these flaky test failures. I think I have a good handle on these issues now, and I think we should be getting fixed soon. Perfetto would be a more robust implementation from the point of view of overall architecture, in the sense that it's one library. And my hope is that somehow we can get it done in a way so that the embedder provides the library to V8, as opposed to a intertwined implementation.
So the embedder meaning, in this case,
Node.
so the embedder of V8.
So it's embedder V8, yes. So so Chrome and Node, and the other possibility is that if it's a library, then it's easier to provide to other VMs too.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I think the other thing that we had with this one is that a lot of these, this issue 84 is just, it's kind of got a little bit raw. I don't know how much of these checkboxes are still valid. I think some of these things are done and they can be checked off, and some of them may, you know, there's probably some new ones, and there's probably some things that can be removed.
Right. I think Ali had volunteered in the last meeting to make a new one that, or clean up the existing one. Am I misremembering?
No, I remembered that too.
Yeah, that's why I wasn't able to get to it. I hope to get to it soon.
Okay. Okay. I think that is it for everything on the agenda. Does anyone have anything else? That is a negative. All right.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. See you. Bye.
Bye.
Everybody, bye.